What is going on, guys?
Welcome back to the Rise Productive Podcast.
In today's webisode, we are talking about the world of income inequality.
True. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about the
topic.
wealth gap. We're talking about income inequality. Very light subject today.
Very light. I mean, I don't actually know. Is it even worth talking about? Is it even worth talking about?
No, we can only talk about fun and, super frivolous things.
So to ease the tension before we get into this deep conversation, how's your week been?
It's been good. I actually just got back. I just flew back to Chicago from Louisville, Kentucky. The old roots, the old stopping grounds. Went to go see the grandparents and caught up with a friend from middle school as well, which was super eye-opening to see how our trajectories differed so much. It's crazy when you get outside of Chicago and realize people have other perspectives, but it was refreshing.
Would you care to just reiterate how to say where you're from, just for the listeners?
So a lot of people will say it's Louisville or some variation of that. And actually, even on my flight to Louisville, someone was like, yeah, everyone thinks it's Louisville, but it's Louisville. Like, you really got to swallow that first syllable.
I think it's sad that the world has a lot of these isms. We're talking about, people say Illinois sometimes. Mm-hmm. People say, I guess even people from Chicago go Chicago, and I'm like, that bears. And that's the thing. I don't know. It's weird that these things happen. I mean, it showcases our differences in like a cool and fun way, but also like when people say things like bagels, I just don't know what to do.
Yeah, it definitely is culture. I definitely appreciate the differences, but sometimes it's like when that guy corrected someone on the plane, it's like, okay, we don't need to be rude about it, just explain.
It's like the you watch Seinfeld at all?
Mm-hmm.
The soup Nazi. It's like, come on, dude. Like, they're just trying to get some mildly specific stuff in their soup in comparison to what you're trying to make. Like, let's not make it a huge deal. All right.
Exactly.
Let's not get too mad at it. You know what's funny? Speaking of Seinfeld, my work. So like the head of the company where I work is a big Seinfeld fan. Right. The CEO is huge into Seinfeld. So things in the office, including meeting rooms and like office appliances like the printer and stuff, are just named after different Seinfeld things.
Oh, that's sweet. What's Jerry named after? Or what is named after Jerry?
I believe it's the printer. I'm not 100% positive. There's like Jerry, George, and Elaine right next to each other to the left of me, and I can't remember what's the printer, what's the copier, and it's just like all right there. And I glanced and laughed.
I'd love to hear the line of reasoning for these assignments, these name assignments.
Exactly. Yeah. CEO is really great. He's a pretty funny guy. And then when I saw all that stuff in there, I was like, yeah, this fits the personality. And then there was like, I'm not going to say the password, but the Wi-Fi name is Festivus. Yeah. So it's just, I don't know. It's funny stuff like that. It's been a good time. I guess tangenting into like my life or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask.
Started work. I think I told you, did we talk about last week how I was remote? Like, did I talk about it on the podcast? Yeah,
you had only been remote, and I believe now, since the last recording, you finally have gone into the office.
Yeah. Great place, really cool. I never want to get too specific. Obviously, like my LinkedIn like shows where I work or whatever, but I'm not gonna get but like it's really cool. Office is great, people are great. Classic like excessive amount of snacks and coffee options situation.
Beautiful.
Dual monitor setup with like stands and stuff, and then like I get a little laptop scenario going on the left there, and I have that closed though. There's like a setting you can put where like when you close the lid, if it's powered, you don't it doesn't like stop your computer from going. That's the option I went with. I didn't want to have a 3-monitor setup. It's just like mildly excessive in my opinion.
Sure.
They have a very similar keyboard to like this one that's like there, which is nice. And then like I bring this bad boy everywhere I go. So I had to do it.
You had to do it to him.
Dude, I mean, like, I just like immediately, like, I remember like one of my coworkers was like, we're going through something in Excel, and I just started scrolling, and it like started free scrolling, and they just went, "Is it? That's pretty fancy." I'm like, yeah, I know, it's
Yo,
pretty
did he
great,
bring
thanks.
his own mouse to work?
Yo, although they did give us a one that is a silent click mouse,
Oh,
which is like kind of, I think for an office setting, like that's not the worst idea I've ever heard. That's actually pretty solid.
yeah, that would be solid for Zoom too. Just because I know with a lot of my classes, I was one of the only people with a mouse because if I had my cell phone muted, everyone would know if I was like, dual screening it and like secretly looking up the answer or what have you. Not to say I'm cheating,
Yeah,
but
yeah, and also like there's like this part of me, and this is something I guess we can talk about a little bit too. Like, dude, I've come to terms more and more over time with my toxic productivity, and like for me personally, I can name you so many times where like I would have been on the phone with somebody, and I probably could have, if I had this silent mouse, gotten away with doing stuff on my computer.
oh,
If
that's
you know,
terrible.
that'd be so terrible. But like that's where my mind goes sometimes. It's like, ooh, silent mouse. Like I can multitask. Like I can do like very basic tasks while like I'm on the phone with somebody. But like it's more rude if they hear the clicking. But like
Yeah,
it's I don't know. That's where my really sad mind goes.
that's awful.
Yeah.
Now all you gotta do is get over the whole fake responses because the whole yeah, oh that's crazy.
I know, that's crazy. I think the problem here is, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but like, or have you heard of the phenomenon? It's like in psychology where you can manage to actually, if you weren't paying attention, remember the last like 3 to 5 seconds of what was said by a person.
Oh really?
Yeah, like it's in your subconscious. It's like it mildly has to be like utilized, and you have to know it's there, and you have to like, make an effort to like reach that really quick.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really good at that. And like people, I don't know if people realized it. I guess I'm telling everyone on the internet, but like I'm very good at that. Like I will not be paying attention. I'll be like, oh yeah, you said this, but like it's just all in the. I got to look up the phenomenon in psych, but it's a thing.
Very interesting. I think I do
So
that as well. Now that I think about it.
yeah, I think everyone can do it. It's like a normal. It's just like I do it a lot, and
Yeah.
I think I've gotten better at being sly about getting away with it, but I got to like work on the whole interpersonal thing and not being like a swine or whatever.
Being a little more present.
Yeah, not thinking about work all the time. It's a problem.
Shame,
It's okay.
shame, shame.
Shame. We even talked about hustle culture last week. When will I
When
ever
will
learn?
you learn?
When will I learn? Listen, Dimitri, when will you learn? You know what's actually been pretty good? Said goodbye to running last week. I'd like to say rest in peace to running in regards to like track.
Mm-hmm.
Got a little bit of the old sinus infection, kind of kicked my butt, and I said, hey, that race I was training for, a no go. Not worth it.
I think it's important to. I think it's as good as it would have been for you to do that race. I think it's important that you just kind of stepped away and closed that chapter, entirely. Because if it's one race that's, closing out the collegiate career, then it's like, when will we close this chapter,
Yeah, I agree. I think it was like the world's way of being like, hey, buddy, you got to shut it down.
Yeah, let's take a step back and, reassess
Yeah.
this next chapter.
Exactly. And I got like a lot on my plate, at the moment. And it's like, I got to figure out that transition at some point in my life. And there was like a lot of really fun stuff last week where like I hung out with my coworkers for a little bit afterwards. My buddy from, one of my buddies who had moved to Indiana had come in town to say what's up to another of my friends who's moving to Texas. And it was just like, I don't know if I would have been able to make those things happen if I had been like so strict on my sort of like running regimen, or whatever. And I don't know. It's like this kind of freeing and nice thing. And it's kind of weird at the same time because the Olympic trials are going on.
Sure, yeah, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's like so exciting, and I love every minute of it. My mom's like, and I was watching it yesterday when I was supposed to race, and my mom's like, you're kind of being really tough here with like the whole, you were supposed to be racing today. I'm like, you know what? I love track. Like, I don't think, it's not binary, you know. It's not like if I can't do it for myself, I can't, like, why. It's different.
Oh yeah, you can be a fan and still a athlete in the sport. Those don't coexist.
No, and I think if anything, like, having the time to not always be so focused on training, because there's like an excessive amount of hours and like mental and physical things that you need to do. Like, eating better is obviously important for your general health, but like I said no, you remember I said no all the time to like stuff, and it was just like it's going to be nice to like take a little bit of that mental pressure off and then let myself enjoy the sport from an outside perspective and just be a real big like NCAA track nerd, and then like watch Diamond League meets, which is something I've always wanted to do but never made the time for because I was so busy like trying to train and stuff.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
yeah, I can be
Finding
a fan
time
of the
to
sport.
appreciate it in other ways. Appreciate the sport in other ways.
Yeah, man. Did you see Rye Benjamin yesterday?
Yeah, crazy.
Holy, he's a dog, man.
Oh
He's so
yeah.
good. I can't wait to see and I don't know if it happened yet, so no spoilers because I think I recorded it. Sydney McLaughlin v. Delilah Muhammad in the final with the 400 hurdles.
Oh yeah, I have not seen that.
Okay, yeah, but if you're aware, both of them are like the two fastest women of all time, and
Oh yeah, of course.
And
I know mostly about Sydney being from Kentucky, but
yeah, and she jogged a 53 yesterday, and the world record's like 52:16. Like, she walked it in the last 30 minutes. I was just like, what the actual? Yeah.
Disgusting.
Such good stuff. Anyways, into the topic of the podcast. I feel like that was nearly a not overthinking level of talking about real world stuff. We're going to talk about the wealth gap, income inequality, all that sort of high level, scary stuff to talk about. I feel like it's something that I wanted to break down with you because I don't know. Last week I was just thinking, like, to be blunt, I ran by my school, my high school. That fun fact, my high school since closed. Random tangent. My high school's closed, so that's always weird. Like, I go to the track and do workouts there sometimes, and at the track across the street is a Bezos building. There's an Amazon fulfillment center that got put in there.
Oh.
And due to that, I went, Bezos building, money, too much money, inequality. That's a good topic.
That is a good topic. That is a good way to spark up the topic, I believe.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I think one of the biggest things, just hopping straight into it here, is sort of I don't know if it's a hatred. That might be a strong word because Amazon does have its great perks. Like, it was just Amazon Day. But I did hold out on buying anything. And I think that one of the big things that Amazon does to perpetuate this is get you away from a lot of local business. I think that probably in the past year, I became a lot more aware of this, but just like something as simple as like buying from like a local bookstore. Like, I'm not saying like Barnes and Noble. Like, Barnes and Noble, if that goes away, I don't really care. But there's a couple black owned or locally owned bookstores in the Chicagoland area, and it's like, how easy is it for you to just like buy an ebook or just buy the book on Amazon for half the price? And it's like, well, is it really worth buying it for half the price? You're really not helping out the situation if you do.
You know what's interesting? And I just had this weird sort of thing because we're going to talk about this. Do you want to talk about the Dave Ramsey clip later?
Oh, I would love to talk about this. Dave Ramsey clip.
That was ridiculous. And but like I just realized I had this bit of an epiphany. We watched, or did you listen to the TED Business podcast that I sent your way?
I did, yeah. I actually was trying to find more podcasts, and I listened to the first clip that they used from that woman. I forget her name.
Yeah.
But the black woman who is the financial consultant, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, I listened to that, and then I listened to the longer one that you had sent me from TED, and they just clipped that entire thing in. So I listened to it twice, and I listened to the rest of it obviously once. But that was a really nice podcast. I think it offered good solutions, both macro and micro.
Yeah, and I just had this bit of epiphany when you're saying that thing to me about the whole, you got to be helping out small business and like black-owned businesses if you want this sort of income inequality to become better. And it's interesting because we watched this Dave Ramsey clip where he essentially he talks about how like inequality is fair because and he breaks it down more of as a meritocracy sort of situation where like if you work for it and you earned it, like it's more fair than if it was like equal, because not everyone would have worked as hard as you to get where you're at, which I personally want to get into like the whole what's it called, equality versus equity situation, which that was a 7-year-old clip, granted, so that was before that was like talked about, which is kind of ridiculous,
right?
But it's interesting because Dave Ramsey's a personal finance guy, right? And Dave Ramsey and any sort of person who would tell you to do textbook personal finance, inherently, textbook personal finance increases the income inequality, because while it may be like the right thing to go with like the small business and stuff for to help with income inequality, it's those like marginal like bad financial decisions that you make that then add up to like you having worse income situation. Do you see what I'm getting at here? I'm not like, maybe I'm not fully tying the knot, but
I hear what you're saying here. It's like it seems disadvantageous to go out and order that cup of coffee, even if it is helping out a small business, because I don't know, any self-financial guy would tell you that you just need to be, brewing coffee at home and saving, I don't know, hundreds of dollars per year, most likely.
Yes.
And not only that, are you not contributing to others? You're, in a position, most people who are listening to self-finance are productivity people. I mean, there's a clear bias here where it's like you have to have some certain level of access to the internet and like a certain level of education in order to, even utilize these tools or think to seek out these tools of information. And that's only going to perpetuate that gap where it's like these people that already have the right of entry are just going to, get further and further away from those who don't.
Exactly. That's a very good point you made there. As well as furthering this, people who are then, inadvertently just trying to make the cheap decision, I don't know, like I would say it is more of a last generation thing to have had like a sort of like pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and it was more reasonable, like from a European, like I don't know, like European immigrants who like went through the Great Depression like right when they got here, and then like they learned good financial discipline through the situation, right? They then were the ones that like could have maybe picked themselves up by their bootstraps. And in that same token though, well, they're the ones who are doing great work for themselves. It's just interesting how this like is hitting in my head of like, if you want to make the right financial decision for yourself, you should go with Folgers. But then in the same token, the only companies that have the ability to serve you really cheap coffee or serve you really cheap products are companies with economies of scale, and that inherently means that you're feeding into the Bezos machine, which
Precisely.
inherently is like negatively affecting you, while negatively affecting not only you but your peers who are in a similar like lower socioeconomic status than Jeff Bezos or like the big. I'm trying to do this to like mess with people because like we bashed on Bill that one time, but like I don't really like have like a huge problem with Jeff.
You
Bezos,
want Jeff Bezos to be the punching bag this time?
No, I don't really like. It's fine. He's an interesting dude. But like, just for example, like this, just like a rich corporation in general, let's generalize more. It's interesting how that works. Like if you want to put yourself in this financially advantageous situation, you are feeding the machine that is big corporations. Well, so which in the long term, is that good for you? Is it not? Because later I'm going to have some opinions on like my thoughts on like how capitalism works and affects the poor in general. But I don't know. It's just weird to think about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's like, it's a tough game when you are feeding into the Amazon deals because, like you said, it isn't helping you clearly. You're clearly augmenting a wealth gap, which if you're someone who feel like it doesn't matter that the wealth gap is increasing, I think the biggest argument for me was that every one of these podcasts or papers I'm reading that is talking about this wealth gap, it's like the last time it was this large was the Roaring 20s. And I was like, oh, perfect. The party that didn't stop.
Nice timing. That's pretty great.
It's like, yeah, that's if this is some looming sign of another recession, then that might be someone that anyone could care about. But there's the other side of the coin where it does seem like the good productivity, or not productivity, but self-financing thing to do would be to buy something that's half the price and just give your money over to Bezos.
Yeah, and it is just this weird situation that's coming up, and I found that interesting, very much so, about the because I remember that reference being said about how like the income inequality hasn't been this bad since the 20s. But like, you know, and this is interesting, and I know DR, you know, on the team who just graduated with me, DR.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He references the movie Margin Call a lot. He and I like the movie Margin Call. I've mentioned the movie Margin Call to you. But there's this very interesting scene that happens. So essentially Margin Call is a movie about a company who during the '08 crisis realized that the collateralized debt obligations that they had on their books were worth nothing before everyone else did. And then they caused a fire sale, bringing the market to immediate collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO is talking to the head of trading at the company after it happens. And the head of trading is basically having this sort of like moral dilemma of like, I want to be out of the company. You know, we just caused like this huge problem. Like, this is awful. Like, I can't do this anymore. And the CEO is just like, I need you to stay on with me for like a few more years, okay? And he's like, do you know what we just did? He's like, this is not different. This is the same thing happening over and over again. And he rattles off like 15 like either recessions or depressions, like in regards to like times like 1885, 1896, 97.
Yeah.
1910, 1912, and he just like goes on for like a 45-second like just spit off of it. And I'm just like, dang, you know, we do keep doing this to ourselves. We do keep like extenuating the problem and like making it a bigger, it's like this like shrink, collapse, shrink, collapse, shrink, collapse. And then like during that process, the people and where they're located, it gets bigger. But he was making this weird argument that was like, there's the same number of sad sacks and fat pigs that there ever was. There's just more of us now. And I'm like, no, this is like the embodiment of like how maybe the 1% are like kind of out of touch with the situation.
Yeah, see, and that's where I just lost Dave Ramsey, because he would be like, oh yeah, like, you know, I wasn't the most intellectually bright person, but I was a B student. I just work harder than everyone else. And it's like, the kids next to me would get Fs, and it's like, well, you don't even question like why someone gets an F. Like, does someone have family problems? Does someone not have time to do homework because they got to work a job to support their family? And it's like, Dave Ramsey probably didn't have to do these things or worry about these things. He was able to focus on school and live like a quote unquote normal kind of childhood, to where he was able to outwork people even if he wasn't the most bright. It's like, that's where you lose me, man.
Yeah, and there was a sort of situation, and I don't know his background too well, but there's a situation where he mentions in the podcast that he basically had gained a fortune, lost a fortune, and gained it again by 30 or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I feel like there's a certain level of inherited privilege there to where like you were able to like fall off a cliff and then come back. Like, I feel like those in similar circumstances with less responsibilities or like financial tolls on them, you know, like financial situations where like the money's just going to keep getting sucked out of them without the ability to like get the money back and then reinvest and get a fortune again. That's something that was definitely messing with me. When he said that, I was like, man, I just don't know if some of the less, the more impoverished and, you know, downtrodden communities in America or in the world, you know, can really like, I guess we're probably going to focus primarily in America here, but like, I don't know if many of the downtrodden people in the United States could fall into that. I think there's this weird level of, I don't know, it happens when I talk to some people who are older as well. And I'm not going to act like I'm not privileged or whatever, but I try to be aware of that and aware of the lack of not cultural, but the lack of, yeah, maybe culture. I don't know. I want to word this the right way. Basically, people sometimes are growing up in situations where the last thing on their mind is financial security, in the sense of being steady with the money and like making the long-term decisions that will set them up for like having, you know, a $2.5 million retirement by the time they're done by putting money in their Roth and their 401k and putting money in the S&P. Like, that's not there for a lot of people in certain communities, you know? And it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't get why we're working under the assumption that I don't get why we're working under the assumption sometimes that like why don't people know these things? It's like, yeah, I think there's a real big issue when it comes to some of these situations where people think that personal finance is inherited through you being born. Like you just are born and know. Like I just think that's a ridiculous notion.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and you make a really good point about how he had lost all that money and then even regained it. I mean, the sheer fact that he would lose $1 million after gaining it and then somehow gaining it again shows the lack of, financial knowledge. Unless this, I mean, I don't know anything about Dave Ramsey besides this video, but I would imagine that this is something where it's just a lack of financial education and he lost it all somehow, unless he made like some big financial risk that was decently well thought out. It's more likely the case that he's just financially ignorant, and yet he was still able to accumulate this massive wealth by quote unquote just his, hard work and effort. And it's like, there's a lot of people on the other end of the spectrum with that same financial illiteracy, because for no one is it, like you said, it's not inherited with anybody, but everyone should be able to have access to that education. There's a lot of people who don't have access to the education nor the resources to ever accumulate some kind of $1 million wealth.
Exactly. And what's interesting? And the guy, so KW, the guy we just went to the wedding of, KW, big city planning guy, obviously. We had like many discussions about this during college because I did a research paper on digital deserts.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that term?
Is it like a food desert, but for...
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Essentially, a digital. I think maybe a definition would be good here, but a digital desert is essentially like, maybe is that not even the right word? That'd be so depressing if that's not the right word. Anyways, basically, there are situations where people grow up in, let's call them digital deserts, and it kind of makes sense when I'm saying it out loud. Like, there are people that grow up with the inability to access the internet to the same effect as like we are,
So is this another product of like redlining?
I don't want to go that far. I want to actually go in a different route because there are some times where I feel like I have to hedge during this podcast, right? And I don't know if I want to do that here, but anyways, I'm gonna make an argument against the whole personal finance thing from a different perspective, to maybe like try to get some of the more stiff-minded thinkers, to agree with it. Because to be blunt, rural people are more likely to be white, and if we go sometimes from a race perspective, some people just turn their brains off because because things that they don't understand make them uncomfortable.
Trust me, I saw that this past weekend.
I bet you did. Like respectfully, that happens sometimes. Some people, when they hear like the race conversation, they get uncomfortable and they don't want to listen.
Sure.
So let me go from this route. Explain to me why, people who live in rural areas don't have the sort of there's digital deserts out there, right? Basically, there are different societies that are more rural where they don't have the access to the information to really expand their wealth. A lot of people who grow up in rural areas will never become successful financially. And obviously, there's a bit of a caveat I want to make here because they don't have to deal with a lot of the issues that happen in like urban scenarios or even suburban scenarios where there's expectations of getting out of certain scenarios, as well as cost of living is just higher and you can't live off the land. So I just want to say that they do have the different situation where they're able to live off the land, and that's kind of the way their families generally do that in rural areas, right? So they're fortunate enough to have that situation. But just taking that away from that, if they didn't have the opportunity to live off the land in that scenario and their cost of living was higher, I want to make the argument that the crime rate situation in those areas would be the same. If it's just like, because like people get broke, people get scared, bad things happen, right? And I'm just saying, I feel like it's It's like this weird thing where people make it about race. It's like, well, why don't they just like learn or whatever? Well, one, they don't really have access to like the internet in the same ways as people in, rural areas don't. However, people in rural areas are able to, and they have societally for years lived off the land. They don't have to worry about the cost of living being high because everyone owns their own land and it's just inherited from generation to generation. So that's what I was trying to go with there, trying to give another perspective and go back and forth to further the point of like, there is a bit of a inherited wealth issue here with race. There's like something to be said about the fact that like house appraisals have just been, ridiculously affected race-wise. There's a study done in the mid 2010s even where Houston suburb was seeing like a 20 or 30% disparity between the appraisal ratings of like houses between like the white and black people like living in that suburb. And I'm just like, really? Like still? Like this is ridiculous.
Right, exactly.
Bit of a rant. If you want to see this episode or any other episode of the Rise Productive podcast, make sure to go and check the show out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else that you can find podcasts today.